Good afternoon. My name is Ken Sauer, and I'm Senior Associate Commissioner and Chief Academic Officer for the Commission for Higher Education. And now that you've all had a chance to get some food and at least begin your lunch, we'd like to start with our luncheon panel, which is a discussion of the support that is needed to provide community engagement opportunities for community and economic development, and what resources are needed in order to focus on engaging cities, foundations, and businesses with faculty and students. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists, and their bios are in your program, so I won't dwell on those. But first of all, we have Jason Bierce, who is Vice President for Education and Workforce Development at the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, and I should say a longtime colleague of the Commission before he left for the Chamber of Commerce. We have Judd Fisher, who is President and Chief Operating Officer for Ball Brothers Foundation, and who has also been a member of the Commission since 2007, I believe. And finally, we have Mayor Greg Goodnight, who is Mayor of the City of Kokomo, and we're delighted to have all three panelists here. So let's begin with kind of a general question, and this would be to all three of our panelists. What does community engagement mean to you and your organizations? Judd, do you want to start, or the mayor?
I'll go ahead. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? I would say that what it means to my organization is that we're a private family foundation. So we're a very large nonprofit, and one of the things that we look at when we're doing community engagement is making sure we understand what the issues are. And we were just talking with Mayor Goodnight a moment ago, but a lot of our communities have a lot of the same issues and things. So we need to, as a foundation, understand who the major influences are, the major decision makers, the people that can get things done. So we try to figure out who those folks are. We see about 100, we do about 100 grants a year. We see about 200 to 300 grants come through our office. So we get to meet a lot of different people. There's boards that have all kinds of different people from our communities on it. So we get to know the folks. So we make sure we know the continuum of issues in our community. We make sure we know the players in our community. And then we start to try to develop a process for our funding and our leadership in terms of working with our partners to get things done. So that's kind of what we do, is we first kind of sit back and make sure we understand how we can attack problems. So that's how we do it as a funder.
Sure. At the Chamber, we work on behalf of several thousand businesses across the state, and I think traditionally when businesses heard the phrase community engagement, I think they equated that with writing a check. Or, is it not working? Talk right into it? That's kind of terrifying. As I said, I think most businesses historically have thought of community engagement as somebody asking them to write a check or serve on an advisory board, sort of ad hoc and somewhat surface engagement. I think, though, that that's changing. I think more and more businesses are recognizing what they typically might have done kind of from a goodwill, good corporate citizenship type perspective. They're increasingly recognizing is really good business practice as well, and that the efforts they can do to engage and sustain partnerships with the community are going to help them better develop and activate talent, and it's going to ensure that the community that their business is located in is one that's going to draw more people into that community. So I think it's changing quite a bit about what we've met in terms of community engagement.
Well, from a city standpoint, there are all kinds of challenges and that cities are facing, and most cities have very similar challenges. And anytime we can engage other groups and people in the community, it obviously helps give us support and coverage, and maybe gives us a different analysis of the problem and a way to take that on. So it seems sometimes we're out there as a mayor or city government having to take on, being the one responsible, and anytime we can have that support or engagement from to help alleviate some of the I guess some of the isolation that you feel sometimes. It's always important to have extra help and extra support out there.
Our keynote speaker, Andy Furco, stressed the need for building partnerships in order to have this community engagement. So let's think about how one might start that partnership. How do you begin community engagement? Would you like somebody to approach you to find out what your organization is interested in, what your priorities are? Or, on the other hand, would you welcome somebody coming to you with a project, a stream of activity, which perhaps you may or may not have on your list? How does that work? What's the best way to engage and start to build these partnerships?
I'm going to take the politically correct answer and say both. I think it can work both ways. There are some things that I feel like most mayors would feel like they have a pulse of the community and they have knowledge of most of the problems that are lingering out there. But the truth is, sometimes we miss things, and sometimes there are things out there that need to be evaluated or reevaluated because they haven't been addressed in a certain amount of time. So sometimes if it happens organically through the community and people bring it to our attention, it works. There's other times, I try to look at things, look 5 years down the road and such, and people have their day-to-day lives and what's important to them, and so part of the job as a mayor or a leader in a community is to look at data and trends taking place. And so sometimes it can start at City Hall. Maybe it's things like population shifts taking place across the state and what's happening in not just our county and our city, but what's happening in the other 92 counties. So I can see where it could be both.
I would say both too. It's a kind of a just case by case. A lot of people think foundations are ATMs, and one of the things we're not is an ATM. We do a ton of research and analysis, and we can look at issues for a long time. Then we can move pretty quickly, especially if we see in the community different organizations that are nimble enough to try and address some problems. So we try to look at that, step back a little bit, look at the issues. We have the perch, right, where we have those hundreds of organizations coming through our doors, so we don't have to be experts, but we can get a pretty good view of the landscape. We're not beholden to the voters. We're not beholden to the shareholders, so we can take a position that usually is really, really well based on research and analysis of things that are happening, and you don't have to fight through a lot of bureaucracy when you're doing that, and if you find the right partners. So, we go both ways. We have done a lot of things that are brought to us. I mean, we don't dream up things. We've had one or two things in my 15 years that my foundation actually had the initial idea for. So that's out of thousands and thousands of grants and tons of projects that we work on. But we do our grant making through asset-based community development. So we look at what the issues are, and then we kind of go out and inventory what kind of organizations can take care of those problems, and then we'll either go to them or if they've come to us, we'll try and connect them to other organizations that are doing the same things, parallel things, or just anything that could help out with a certain problem. I think also in the we had those two different questions. How do we approach things? I think the other thing is too, when there are both those questions were going after sort of negative sounding things, issues and problems out there. There's also times when there's opportunities and they pop up, and then you can react very quickly as a foundation to go to different organizations and say, hey, did you know about this? Did you think about talking to this other organization and trying to work with them? And what if we did a cluster of grants to try and help fund this so you don't have to try and go out and spin up and find dollars elsewhere or pull someone away from a current project? Is there a way that we can strengthen you through the funding and through other partners to try and attack an opportunity that has come up for our community? So we make sure we really know what the different pluses are out there in our community, the organizations that can really get things done, and how we can connect them very quickly to address some of the opportunities out there. And I'll just give you one example quickly. It's the Next Level Trails initiative that the first round is due today for the first $25 million of the $90 million that is available from the state. And our community, and my foundation for philosophical, legal, and logistical reasons had no way of doing any matching dollars for that. So we went and tried to help a couple different groups put together an application for today over the last 2 months, where my staff worked, till midnights for the last 2 weeks for sure, to try and help a couple consultants put together the applications for 3 different projects. And my foundation does not put our name on any of that. We don't need our name in lights, but we want to try and make sure that because we know what's happening out there, we can try and bring people together. So that was a very fresh example, and we'll see how that application goes. I think it got sent in this morning, but it was a lot of work, and that was a neat opportunity that we were able to join in on. So that's one example, I guess.
Since both the panelists, my fellow panelists, said both approaches are warranted, I feel like the contrarian in me should say neither works. But unfortunately, I have to agree and say that I think the direction that comes from is less important from the business perspective than whether or not the proposal presents a return on investment for the business. I think at the Indiana Chamber, we've been as guilty of this as anyone. We come to businesses and say, you should get involved, you should engage in this effort because it's good for the community, it's good for students, it's good for the university, and all those things are true, but oftentimes they're just as important for the business's bottom line if they're framed in the right way. And if you want it to be less a one-off and a check or a grant project and more of a sustained ongoing partnership, I think it's really important from the beginning to really make a strong business case as how the employer, it's not just a goodwill gesture on their part, but it's actually going to help their business's bottom line as well.
Okay. Students, ultimately, this is community engagement is about students. And the question here is, what kind of skills do you think students ought to have as they become involved in student engagements? What are your expectations about, kind of the things that students ought to be able to do if they're going to have or be part of a successful community engagement involving your organizations?
I'd say communicate, be able to communicate if they're going to be out in the communities. Extremely important to be able to go into neighborhoods and be able to talk to different people. There's some great programs in Muncie, where I'm from, that are good examples of that. We had one nonprofit called Eco Rehab that does sustainable housing, and they take about 30 Ball State students and help do a strip down house and reconstruct it in a sustainable manner. And so they go into some neighborhoods where take an abandoned home. But there's a good example on one home where a homeowner nearby of one of the houses being worked on went and talked to the students in January a couple years ago, and it was pretty cold out. There was no heat at the construction site, and that person happened to be a pastor in the neighborhood. Got to know the students a little bit, gave them a key to his church and said, use the restroom, go warm up, things like that. But you need to be able to interact like that. But it's a great, I think it was a great relationship building thing within that neighborhood, but just some basic things to be able to, communicate with people and then thank them. And I think that's very important. So a lot of soft skills things are needed, I think, from students, and that's a good learning, even though they're doing, their main thing was to rebuild this home. You're also involving yourself in a neighborhood, so knowing how to, interact and treat people and and expect to be treated too, is really important. So a lot of soft skill stuff I think is important, and also know where you are, have knowledge of the area you are in. I think that's really important.
I don't know that there's a secret sauce. I think a lot of the qualities that would make somebody a successful student generally are often the same qualities that make somebody successful in a community engagement project. I mean, the communication, the ability to work collaboratively as part of a team. I do think, though, that one skill that is especially important in community engagement, and I think it's important just in society in general, and it's becoming less common, is just the ability to reconcile different perspectives and points of view and work with people that don't come to a problem from the same vantage point or perspective as you do, and that's okay. You don't even necessarily have to agree, but you have to be able to balance those different perspectives in order to build the will to move something forward. I'd like to say that that's a quality that is lacking just in students, but I think it's a quality that's become more lacking in society at large, so we got to work it out for it.
Just to add to that, I don't know if it's, I would say something that I think would be important, and not necessarily a skill, but more of a quality, would be just a personal passion towards the subject that they're engaged in, whether it be trail grants to helping provide homeless housing or rehabilitation of homes. Something, I think anytime people have that personal desire and that passion, I think it's important at every level, and especially with our young people.
Yeah, I've heard that the question that Google increasingly asks its employees are, what problem do you want to solve? Which I think is a good question for us to be asking our students as well. Less, what do you want to be, or what career path do you want to be in, but is there a problem you're passionate about solving? And that can often make a lot of things come into focus.
We just celebrated Valentine's Day, which is about relationships, and sometimes relationships can have their problems, so you have to try to work these out. Community engagement is about partnerships. So what are some of the challenges in working with colleges and universities in terms of building and sustaining this partnership? Are there issues related to maybe the kind of students that are coming, or is it with faculty? Are there administrative challenges that need to be overcome in developing these kind of community engagement partnerships?
I'll tell a quick story on that one. We worked at Ball Brothers Foundation. My foundation was approached. This is where community members approached us about trying to help out with neighborhood associations and development in different neighborhoods throughout Muncie, and there's 40+ neighborhoods, I think, in Muncie. And so we engaged in a couple meetings with Ball State, which turned into Building Better Neighborhoods with a lady named Heather Williams, which a lot of the Ball State folks here know. And Building Better Neighborhoods was, Heather's job was to really be out in these neighborhoods and helping them. So this one small, it may seem minor, but this thing works out. We get it all taken care of. We do a $200,000 grant to get it up and running, which was several years ago, and Ball State has since absorbed the expense for this. We don't do grants for it anymore, and the program's still going. But when it first started, Heather was at first going to be on campus. Her office was going to be on campus at Ball State. And that is sometimes difficult for people in neighborhoods to get to. There's also a stigma for a lot of people that have not gone to college, have not been on Ball State's campus, and trying to go and navigate the just some of the physical aspects of a campus are daunting for some, and so that's not going to be very friendly. So the next thing that happened was my foundation, we had a discussion with Ball State, some administrators, and we said we really need the Heather to be outside of the university. And they said okay, and they're going to put her in a building right actually near where I am. It's this building, and they're going to put her in a lawyer's office. So it didn't have very good parking. It was downtown Muncie, which was fine. That was a good part. It was off campus, but people would have had to find parking, get into this building, go up through a lawyer's office, and find Heather's office. So eventually we found a place that was much more kind of accommodating. And she was obviously going to go out into these neighborhoods also, and does a lot, but we were able to say, okay, we're doing a $200,000 grant to get this started. This is not going to work in terms of matching up the place that people can meet and feel comfortable with Heather to start with when she's in her office. So we found an accommodating place for that, and that was one thing in that partnership, I think, and with the university, that we were able to negotiate it as one of the partners and the funder in that. And you know, you have to be able to step forward and say, hey, this isn't going to work if you do it this way. You're going to put all this money into it. It's just not going to work unless you have a place where people are comfortable to go visit this person. So that was something where we were able to work through something that really would have hamstrung the whole project, I think.
Well, I think, you know, looking at, every year we survey employers, thousands across the state, about what are their most pressing issues and where are the gaps, where are their pain points. And I think, you know, the hard truth is the majority of our employers aren't engaging with their universities. About 2/3 said that they don't currently engage with their universities. Less than half engage with their K-12 system. So I think employers and education institutions are more siloed from one another than we would like them to be. I think there are a variety of reasons for that. There's really no finger pointing that needs to happen because I think we both own this. I mean, I think there's some practical realities. Businesses don't function or operate around an academic calendar, so I think there's some synchronicity issues there. I think also our colleges are very complex systems with lots of departments, and they're organized differently, and I don't think most employers even really know how to go about engaging with the university system. And then, you know, this last point I'll raise, I hear it so much, it's almost a cliche, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's any less true, which is employers and educators generally don't speak the same language. They don't talk about problems in the same way. And I think that is a challenge that often prevents true partnerships from forming. I will say that a trend that seems to be arising that I think could be productive in this area are these intermediaries that can kind of exist in the space between education and employers and others, and kind of help bridge the gap between how they talk about these things and make sure that everyone's coming to the table from their own perspective, and that's being recognized, and can really kind of start to fill in those gaps and move towards a more productive relationship. Because I think, you know, the reality is they tend to exist in two different worlds, and they're motivated in slightly different ways, and they have different priorities and expectations, and sometimes you need kind of an unbiased third party to kind of help reconcile those differences.
No, and I would agree with the reference to the silos. That's always a concern for us. And we have an IU campus in Kokomo. The concern's always that it's just two different entities acting in two separate ways, and I'm always trying to figure out ways to get the campus more integrated in the community, where the students feel some sort of ownership in the city and take the same amount of pride, and don't look at this as hopefully fall in love with the city, and once they've graduated, they want to stay and live and be a part of Kokomo. And that's the hardest part, I think, is to make sure that it's not just a project, or it's not just something that they have to do through their time on the campus, but it's something that they have make sure they have a vested interest in the long-term success, not only of the university, but with whatever project within the city.
Yeah, Jason, you mentioned third party or intermediary. Do you have any examples of that, or how would that work, and that really is for any of the panelists here?
Sure. I mean, I can give a couple examples. I think a foundation can serve in that capacity. I think we've seen examples across the state of different nonprofit organizations. Probably the most well-known example is the ECHO group in the Columbus area. There's also the Horizon Education Alliance up in the Elkhart, South Bend area. ROI, Regional Opportunity Initiatives, I think. But basically, there are these different groups that are often nonprofit organizations that are kind of sitting in the middle between the business interests and K-12 and higher education, and they can often sort of kind of address those gaps in terms of the language gaps, the expectation gaps, and kind of help coalesce around something for collective action. Another example, not from our state, but from Colorado, there's a group called CareerWise Colorado that's really trying to retrofit, if you will, the Swiss apprenticeship system in Colorado, and they found that they needed an intermediary because the business community was very isolated and focused on its things. The K-12 and higher education interests were isolated in their part, and there was really no one entity at the table that could kind of both address the gaps but also just keep things moving forward. And so I think that is a model that we're seeing that could be quite productive, and sort of it kind of helps establish a level playing field. They don't come to the table with the same baggage that other entities that have a vested interest in the problem might have, and so I think that's something that we're exploring that we might be able to support from the chamber perspective.
Okay. Let's talk about applications that might come to you for some type of project or kind of community engagement. So, Judd, starting with you from the standpoint of a foundation, when somebody comes to you with an idea, an application, what are the kinds of issues or problems that you see in those applications, and maybe also turning that a little different way, do you have any thoughts about best practices, the kind of applications that come to you that really look good and that you can really get behind?
Yeah, sure. I think when we're looking at applications, we read through everything. We do a preliminary application, so that's a step first that we can weed out grants that we're not going to requests that we're not going to take, full requests we're not going to take. So by the time you get to full request, the applications are written pretty well, and we are looking for several of the things that they're addressing a lot of the issues that we all have in our communities. But we also are looking for ones that aren't so complex. They're gonna die because of the complexity. Ones that can continue to be funded. You have to have something that's got some sustainability. So we are looking for. I mean, we always talk about it internally. Occam's razor. Let's look for the simplest answer to this issue. And so that's what we do with applications when we're looking at. We also want to make sure the organizations, when they come to us, they know us. I had a major organization come to us one time, and I have, my days are one meeting after the other, and my staff usually does most of the work for me in terms of letters and things like that. I just have to delegate. And so a lot of times I'm sometimes not ready for a meeting, meaning I just don't know the whole group that's going to come in, but we figure that out very quickly. But one time we had an organization that was a statewide organization come to us, and I had come right off, it was one meeting after the other day, and I went in, and this person said, okay, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization? And this is an organization that was coming to ask us for money. And so I took that opportunity to do my elevator speech, because why not? And so that's what I always do when someone presents an issue like that or doesn't quite know what to say or whatever. But I just thought it was kind of funny. If they're coming to ask for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're asking me what we do and what we like to. We have a website. We have a phone. We have all kinds of things that you can figure out. We have every grant we've given since 2007 is an Excel spreadsheet on our website, and our annual reports are on there. And so they didn't do their homework, So we need to come together when we get past that part of it. I try to make sure I know it. This is the Girl Scouts. I'm just going to tell you. I knew what the Girl Scouts did. We've done some things with the Girl Scouts in the past, but not at the state level. This person's no longer there anymore. And I just and that was just fascinating to me that they would come in and say that. We need to get to the heart of the matter, right? They're there because they're going to ask us for money. My job is to figure out how to deploy dollars in the best possible way, the most impactful way. That's all I do. And so let's get past the part where they try to figure out what we are. We're a very large organization. So that's, I want to get to the heart of the matter very quickly. There's a lot of intelligent people usually in our conference room when we're talking about this stuff. To have someone come in and say that means they didn't do their homework, and I don't know, maybe it's a little lazy. So.
Do you feel better, Judd?
Yes.
I'm happy to report that we too have a website at the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. Although you'd be surprised how many people come to us asking us for a meeting, and when they send the calendar invite, it'll say Indy Chamber, so you know who you're working with. But I joked about having a website, but on that website, like many organizations, we have our strategic plan, and you know, our drivers, our priorities, our metrics that we're looking at are out there for any and everyone to see. And you know, generally speaking, if we can't draw a direct line between an effort that we're trying to doing and something that's a part of that vision document, we're probably not going to do it. And I would say that's the case for community foundations. Probably the case for the city of Kokomo. So looking for that strategic alignment as opposed to just looking for dollars. I also say that we have a foundation, but it's the worst kind of foundation. It's the kind of foundation that's usually out looking for money on its own. So we're doing the same process in reverse, is, you know, looking for funding opportunities and missions that are aligned with our strategic priorities.
And I'd say the same thing. We a lot of the ideas that come to us, we try to delegate and kind of push them to the right agency that may be have an interest in the same issue, whether it be the United Way. Sometimes it's a community foundation. I'm involved in our Greater Kokomo Economic Development Alliance, which is the chamber, and Indiana University Kokomo has a seat at the table, and Ivy Tech, as well as our some people from the banking industry and our large industries. And so, you know, when people come to me, my main focus is, well, who else would want to see, you know, analyze this and see what we can do to resolve the problem. One of the things we're working on in Kokomo, we started this a little over a year ago, and it's through the United Way. It's our 75 and 5 initiative, which is to make sure that 75% of the children that are ready, they're going to be entering kindergarten, are kindergarten ready. They have the skills they need to just begin early childhood development learning. They know how to tie their shoes, they know how to hold a pencil or a crayon, and then they know the basics and things. So anytime we do that, again, like the others, we try to make sure we partner with the right group and we're supportive of it, but sometimes it's better off that we don't necessarily take the lead on everything.
You know, there's a lot of, obviously this is a room full of people who are very interested in community engagement, and do you have any advice to all of us, the commission, institutions, perhaps you know, other cities, other foundations, other businesses, to encourage interest in and involvement in community engagement on the part of faculty and students?
Well, I'll say this. I think it always helps if it's a lot of times just for political reasons. When it's a mayor's idea or a city's idea, it can sometimes be shot down. So it's nice to have a partner in a group that wants to identify the problem and what are we trying, you know, what problem are we trying to solve, whether it's our health rankings or it's to you know, get a smaller percentage of our constituents to you know, we have a problem in Indiana with people with the smoking rates and obesity and all those other things that affect us and that define us in some ways. So you know, anytime I can you know, have other groups you know, partner with us and be engaged and like I say, give us some sort of coverage so it doesn't face all the political winds that sometimes happens in mid-sized and small communities.
And this is going to sound obvious, but I think first just recognizing up front how hard and time-consuming collaboration is. And you know, whenever I reach out to one of our members and say, hey, could you be a part of this, invariably the first couple of questions I get are, how long is this going to take and what's going to come out of it? And they're just very bottom line in that way. I've also heard, this is not my phrase, but sometimes employers, when they're dealing with educators, they feel like they're being nibbled to death by goldfish, and that like they're coming at them from every angle with all these well-intentioned asks. Can you be part of this? Can you volunteer for that? Can you support this? But it's not really part of a comprehensive strategy. And so I would encourage you, as you're thinking about ways to engage businesses or the business community writ large, to think about how, you know, as opposed to just a one-off or an ad hoc request, how you could kind of lay out sort of a strategic vision and where that business could plug in over time, so it seems less random and more of sort of a sustainable partnership.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of things. One is make sure you know the landscape when you're out looking to solve a problem. I've seen it. I was in a meeting the other day with a bunch of foundations, and all of them are friends. They're people I've known for a long time, but there were some of them were new in their position. I've worked with them in other areas throughout my career in Muncie, and one foundation leader asked another one, said, "I don't really know about your foundation. What do you do?" And I thought, whoa, that was interesting because these are two big organizations. And I realized one person was a little bit newer, so they started talking and got through that. But that happens a lot. I've worked with, my foundation, I should say, has worked with 5 governors now since I've been there. I've worked with 3 mayors. I've worked with 4 presidents at Ball State University. So all the time you have to re-up. And from my position, what I do is I can be the institutional knowledge of our community. Now, you don't have to take what I say as, you can say that that's BS or whatever, but I think that I've been there 15 years now, and I've seen a lot of stuff and a lot of different people, but we can connect things. But find the organizations that can do that in your communities. Make sure that you know who they are. If you have a university, obviously in a community, that is a great resource. If you don't, find the entities that have been around a while, leaders that have been around a while, and go around and figure out what they do in the community. I often see people that come into an organization, whether it's business, government, or a nonprofit, and they say, "Oh, look here's the problem, and here's the data, and here's how we're going to solve it," and they haven't even looked at the things that are out there working already. We have a major thing going on right now in Muncie. We have the thing called Project Leadership there. It's an organization that did that Occam's razor thing early 2006, I think. They came to us and did a small grant, and they got going on a thing called Project Blueprint over in Grant County, and all they did was link our Kalamazoo promise that's all over the state of Indiana for kind of some unfortunate reasons, right? But it is 21st century scholars. If you have a school system like we do as Muncie Community Schools that is 83% or whatever free or reduced lunch, so you have over 8 in 10 students are eligible for free college, use it. It's too bad you're there, but use that. You have 8 in 10 kids that can go to college for free. Project Leadership started a while back, and they've gone and taken in Grant County in Delaware and made the counties the highest rate of signups for 21st century scholars in the state. So we're taking advantage of that, linking those students. And we just had an organization come in and say, "Hey, we're going to start something up. We've talked to the state. We're going to get something going where we can help kids be more successful in their post-secondary attainment." And I go, "Do you know what Project Leadership is?" And this is a very big organization, very well-known person that changed jobs. And they're like, "No." And so you make sure you know what's going on in your community. Do the research. And I have the luxury of being able to do a lot of research and analysis. I'm probably not that good at it, but I have a really good staff that can crunch numbers for me and really kind of decipher what are things that are working, what are things that are going on out there. So what we do is we try to feed that out to the community as much as we can without any biased information. We just take data and we send the information to people. We tell them about Project Leadership. We tell different organizations about that. But what I would do is just make sure you know what's going on. Go to your chamber, go to your university. Well, everyone here can go to universities, right? But if you're in your community, go to the organizations that exist that have been around a while and gather, get a pluralistic, make sure your resources are pluralistic so you're getting different viewpoints. But there are things out there that you can help. Do that asset-based development plan by going and seeing what plans are out there, what people are doing, and try and just do that before you strike out on a new path.
This is such an important point. I think I'd like to make it again, which is there are very few new or original ideas out there, but there are a lot of things that haven't been done to scale yet. And I think it's a lot easier for businesses to get involved if it's part of a coalition. But I think all too often, and I think this is across the board. There's an assumption that it's never been done before, and people are often running before they've even taken the time to look at the landscape, look what's going on in the region, look what's going on in that sector. And generally speaking, there are at least a handful of groups that are doing a version of the same thing, just none of them are coordinating very well with one another.
On this question of being more familiar with the landscape, or your organizations or a business or a city, would it help if there was a single point of contact, sort of an office of engagement on a particular campus through which different ideas could emerge and come to you? Would that help, or are you? I get the impression that you're getting a lot of ideas from a lot of different people, and some may be more knowledgeable about the landscape or your organization than others. So would a single point of contact help?
I don't know if it would or not, because if if it all has to filter through that one person, group, agency, and they put the brakes on it, and if they're not, I mean, it's hard for any one person, I think, to have. I mean, I'm in my 12th year as mayor, and I pretend that I know everything that's going on in my community and every problem, and I understand it all, but the truth is I don't, and so I don't know if it would be necessarily a good thing to have one entity group. It's kind of nice to have more of a groupthink situation, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with the mayor. I think conceptually that makes sense. As a practical matter, I think it'd be hard to do, but I do know that employer engagement has become a priority of nearly everyone right now, and as a result, I think more so than ever before, organizations of all types are coming at employers from all sorts of different angles. So it would be ideal if we could figure out a more coordinated way to do that engagement, but I think the mayor's point is well made, that you don't want to create a bottleneck either. I think at a minimum, have an idea what your own organization is doing in terms of engaging the community would be helpful. I think there are resources in communities that can help you get a sense of the pulse, whether it be philanthropy or government or others. But all too often, there's no real one, centralized knowledge base that can kind of lay out the groundwork for you. Sorry, you're smiling.
I think Office of Engagement is one really great resource. I think it's an awesome resource, and it'll be able to bank the different things that are going on in your community, and it's a place that everyone should look to. But it should be one of those resources. You've got so many other things that we all deal with in a community, and I found I was talking to Commissioner Lovers 2 days ago. We've seen each other 3 days in a row now for different things. But we were talking about a couple different things the other day, and one was some of the things that we've learned here at the Commission through our meetings is that business doesn't really trust government. So that's just a blanket statement. But for some of the programs that are out there right now, the next level job stuff and everything, I went from a meeting where we talked about that. I don't know, I can't remember, it was several months ago now, and I went to a chamber or another meeting in our community for workforce development, and the first thing our chamber president started telling me was, after I asked him about the next level jobs initiative and some of the programs there for businesses, I said, hey, we had, Secretary Milo came and talked about this stuff, and Danny Lopez came in and talked about this stuff. How's that going with businesses? Did you distribute the material? And he said, people, businesses are mostly skeptical about that. Skeptical about getting $5,000 for an employee to get trained up on, how to run an impact wrench or learn how to run the robot arm that's a great thing. You shouldn't be skeptical about that. So we're missing a connection there. And I think that you have an awesome Office of Engagement that can be a place to go and try and figure out how these programs work, and other programs are going on in the community. But you also have to hit different things within your community, different points of contact with communication and everything, and make sure you are coming at it from several different angles. So Office of Engagement, I think, is awesome, but it's got to be one of several things in your community that you keep everyone up on, with whatever's happening, all the programs and good things that you can tie into. So.
Okay. Well, it is time to move on, so let's thank the panel for a good conversation.